been working here for 15 years already. When I started, we had teaching in our courses in English, and we have always had some foreign students. But nowadays, on my courses, even more than half of the students may come from other countries than Finland.
Okay, well, when I first arrived here, it was in the end of August, and I didn't know that the name was the student campus. I thought it was like a suburb or something of Espoo. So when I arrived here, it was dead. I found no one in the streets. It was empty. And this was a shocking moment for me. I was terrified, like, where I am, where I am.
Everyone in Finland is independent and like individual ones, but in China it feels like a big group.
People don't like to talk randomly, well, if they are not friends to you. But as soon as you become friends, then people start to be very open, and yeah, that I like.
Even if you have been in a project with some Finnish people, and after the project is finished, they might not even say hello sometimes, so you're not friends after that. But that usually in Ethiopia, people become friends with in this kind of situations.
Finding a job here has been difficult though, which is like something that hasn't happened in other places, but like in Finland you really quite need Finnish unless like there's a few jobs. For economic students especially, like it's really hard to find a job like in Finland. So that is one challenging aspect.
You need to start the conversation yourself. People are a bit shy to talk with you, but otherwise people are really honest. And when people say no to you, it means no, and it's not like they change their mind soon. I really like this correctly.
If someone says a course starts at 9, it actually starts at 9, and not really at 9:15. So those kinds of things I feel are super similar. With Finnish people I'm more direct because Finnish people are generally also more direct and generally tell you more directly what they think. Whereas especially with one Japanese quite good friend of mine, but you could never criticize her directly. So that's something you need to, over time, you learn understanding how cultures criticize or not criticize in a way.
I can't like tell like different like negative feedback in person. So those like feedback form and a peer assignment would help.
Quite often I find myself defending Finnish values against the real foreigners. So I think actually there's a lot of similarity with the Finnish and the German system and how things work and things are organized.
First of all, I didn't know it's that strict here to do like every assignment and follow every deadline. So probably I did a couple of mistakes. Then these mistakes showed me that I actually have to pay more effort, put more effort in doing assignments.
In Asia, we do our assignments mostly 80% assignment by pen and paper, But here, everything is MS Word or in a PowerPoint we have to do. So I mean, initially I would say that it was a bit tricky to shift everything from pen and paper to digital.
It happened also some cases that the instruction were not really clear, and then we confused about what we should write about here and which ones we should. Especially when the type of the course is like there's not like a mathematics course that you should reach to the one answer, but it's like a descriptive work, and then you describe something.
In India, I mean, it's more India or even in China, I would say from my friends that it's more about like learning by heart. I mean, there's a big emphasis in just learning by heart. But here, there's no question of learning by heart. It is you analyze everything critically and all. One gross difference is here they expect to analyze things much more critically.
in economics back home, the good student was the guy who had the best memory. Like the night before, he could just read and just like put everything down on the paper that he had read.
If I want really to make a student, get them engaged in all the activities and assignments, I have to explain these background issues. For instance, what are my ideas of pedagogical, or what are my pedagogical ideas behind some assignments? I have to open up those a bit to the students.
Here you have a lot of focus on like citation and referring to your sources. In Egypt it's more, I shouldn't say like flexible because it shouldn't be like something like that, but forgiving.
We went through, I went through the rules and regulations, so there also it was mentioned. So I didn't understand it so much because it was so different, from where I came from. But later when the teacher told in class to everyone that like these are the things we take care here, I got the point. And then I started asking in the IT room our Finnish students, so they also said like this is how we do things here and stuff.
I learned by the mistakes of my friends. This is the primary source for me. Yeah, by the mistakes of my friends and people that I don't even know. Maybe professors didn't give it a lot of attention while they're speaking on it because again it's some kind of, it's already in the Finnish culture, so you shouldn't like focus on it a lot. But for me it was something that I had to work on.
And I think there's also a trust in the culture more than in the United States, that maybe they even think that people are gonna, kind of like just not be lazy and copy whole entire text. It could be that.
One of the challenges is that I have noticed that I, in a way, suppose that the students are thinking the same way than I do, or they know how we used to do things in our university.
Because sometimes I didn't know that at first when I came in Finland, but sometimes when the professor asks something, no one answers. At the first I thought that really no one knows the answer. But then after that, like this is the second semester for me, I can guarantee that some people there, they know the answer, but they just don't want to interact. I don't know why. Until now, I don't know why.
But oftentimes, I must say, it is quite one way. It's not so interactive. So sometimes, of course, you might get like tired and start to wonder, thinking other things because it's not so interactive. Yeah.
I can say that interaction is much more in Iran. It's like that the teacher is like jumping the whole time, writing stuff on the board, asking questions from the students, and it's like that you should be ready to answer a question. So it's like that you should listen to the teacher.
How much work was put in that he actually cared about the subject. He'd also made it really easy for you to care because he highlighted everything that he potentially found interesting or you could find interesting. It's not just like, this is what I think is good, but he said, this is what you also could look at and tell me if you think it's important and things like that.
things, and you can ask questions that if students are really getting the things and how far they are in learning.
For example, some in the middle, some questions that make everyone work. For example, think about this for a while and let's talk about it. It doesn't happen often. Of course, there were some lecturers who did that, and that makes the lecture very interesting.
What I typically do is that I let them work first in small groups, and then the group answers to me, and then they're not putting themselves on the spot, but they are rather representing the group or pair that they worked with, and I just walk around and ask people. So-called cold calling, although it's not cold calling because it's a very safe environment. So I do a lot of interaction. I think typically the feedback that I get from students is that they really like it and they find it useful.
Like doing, like giving some examples so students they can solve them during the class. I guess that's better probably.
Like, it's just basically we don't want to be talked at. We want to also be like, I know many people get like scared of asking questions, like they think that they don't want it, but you end up being more invested in the course when you know that at any point he will just turn to you and ask you a question.
An open dialogue, discussion, also a chance to not just speak, but create something, have a project. I think that's where it could be the best. Yeah. And also if I'm not just working on my own.
Writing on the board is completely different than like looking at slides, because I prefer the formulas to be written on the board rather than watching them on the slides.
They usually try to include some interactive discussions in the lectures, which is quite innovative for me.
So I think if a teacher wants, he can himself can form the group and make sure that there is a diversity in the groups, which is like no doubt, undoubtedly a good thing.
Like they could share some of their life stories and kind of open up a little bit about what kind of experiences they've had, especially for international students, to see what kind of experiences that the teacher has gone through and how maybe their career has changed, how their life has changed. I think that's something that American teachers like to do a lot. Even though they have this hierarchical role that I'm a teacher, they really like to open up about the rest of their life. And I think that's something that is up to the teacher if they want to, but if they do, it can bring a lot of enrichment to learning. You can see that it's not just a teacher, there's a person, and they have their whole life experience, and they have their things that they've done that they like or they don't. And yeah.
Just being yourself is one thing. So trying to be interested in what the people, whatever the group is, what are their various backgrounds, and I do lots of exercises to find that out as well. So open mind and trying to learn and be interested in who the people are, and then tailor your teaching to their specific needs.
A very good thing while dividing the teams. He said, like, I don't want the team to be only made of Finnish people. I want at least international student people, just to force like multicultural thing that we are discussing. And this was a very constructive thing for the team, like to work with different opinions, different people, maybe different motivations as well.
Earlier I could use Finnish examples. Then I noticed that I have to take more international viewpoint in the examples, and I started to use European examples. But nowadays I've noticed that because my students are coming from all over the world, the examples of the data cases that we are studying have to be international, really international.
In economics, for example, we don't have a lot of group work, but when we do, it's really nice to be able to get examples and source insights from people from very different countries, because when you write your essays, you have to consider like a whole bunch of perspectives.
Then you get different opinions and different working approaches, and then you learn things, because maybe you think that there's only one way to get some results, but then you came to know that there might be some other approaches.
Finnish way of organizing stuff is very different. Like everybody gets the task and everybody works independently. In Ukraine we would just meet and do everything together.
In my opinion, when you have this multicultural thing, you should keep one common language so that everybody knows what is going on.
There was a course that it was offered in English, but since most of the students were Finns, I don't know why, but the teacher kept emailing in Finnish. And we reminded him several times, but then like it didn't work again, and he kept like sending emails in Finnish. It was like a bad experience for me. All the time we had to use the Google Translate for that, but it was a little bit awkward. And there was once is like we had this big group, and there's like 5 or 6 Finnish, yeah, and they were like discuss using like Finnish all the time. But well, when they like need me to like ask like do you want to do this part or that part, or I feel like when they want something they speak English to me. Yeah, that's like the most horrible part. Otherwise it's not that bad.
During these courses there should be some multicultural group where you should equally divide the group so that every group should have the diversity of every nationality.
I want to like get involved more like during my stay in Finland. Like I like to hang out with Finnish students because well, yes, in Finland.
It's my personal opinion that I feel that I wish I could have more Finns as my course mate and a group mate or something like that.
Yeah, but I think some teachers try to mix the Finnish and international students together. That's especially, it's very good for communication between international students and Finnish students, because again, Finnish students are not that communicative at the first step, but then when you're in the same group they have to communicate, and then it grows up, and then you may become friends or something.
You don't get to speak Finnish in Finland, and this is something that maybe most of the foreign students will agree with me, because everyone speaks here English. So you are not forced to learn the language, but when you are going into the Finnish market now and trying to find a job, then you will be shocked by that. Now you need to start learning Finnish or you are not going to be hired.
They teach you grammar, but they don't teach you the everyday life stuff. And they quite quickly go into just grammar, and it's really, really fast. It's not always the fault of the teachers in a way, it's also kind of a fault of the system and of, Finnish people not really being so used to foreigners speaking their language. It's so easy to switch to English and so on. So but this kind of integration of learning Finnish, I think, would really help also people to stay after. There are lots of international students who would, in a way, like to stay but don't get jobs because they don't speak Finnish.
I mean, as such, we don't really get advice about what's the job market, in what specific themes jobs are available, how should we proceed. Maybe we have to go to the professor and ask a couple of times, then maybe we can get some advice.
Most of the courses are designed in a way, at least in my major, to make you an academic scholar. It's not really designed to just find a job, or sometimes it's just designed to just fulfill the task in the courses. This is also a matter that how much they have the knowledge about the industry. And then something's good in some courses. We have the guest lecturers from the industries, and then they come and they talk about their own real experience. These things make more sense sometimes.
It would be nice to have some kind of, maybe, let's say, career day, but it's just the name. When the teachers of the different departments can tell about your future, where you can work, because I kind of hesitate in which direction I should go, and this is kind of, I think it's not acceptable for the master's student. Master's student should know where he wants to work.